hello and welcome. Thank you for tuning in to the Mission Thriving Life podcast, a weekly podcast designed to help you thrive, not just survive the challenges of life, leadership, and faith. I'm your host, Nick Asolis, here with Joel again, and we're going to kind of pick up where we left off. We're in the middle of this series here at Mission called Heaven and Hell and Everything in Between. And heaven and hell by themselves are big enough topics, and then you just throw the everything in between. You just have this like hamburger of content that we have to go through, and reactions. Joel, you've been pretty generous from the beginning of the series and throwing out your email address there, and I know you had just a lot of great feedback, questions, and you admitted this week that, or this last Sunday, that you're a Bible nerd, and apparently there's a lot of people out there who are also Bible nerds with you, because you got a lot of questions. So what kind of stuff, what kind of questions are you hearing from the Bible nerds, the fellow Bible nerds out there?
Well, I think it's a lot of curiosity. I mean, I do think it's interesting. I've gotten more emails, not necessarily. Always get emails from people that want to debate things I have to say. That's not really been this series. It's been more of like, hey, you mentioned this. Can you tell me more about that? And some of that is because we're speaking about a lot of things at such a high level that I'm not able to fully investigate or explore, like we talked about last week, like the governance war. And so a lot of people are interested in that and wanted to dig into that more. Or I've had several questions about, we talked about this in the podcast last week, but specifically about postmodernism or things like that, and how that reconciles or doesn't. And now this last week I talked about worldviews, and I mentioned that in a few weeks we're going to talk about the 5 basic categories of worldview. So people are already like, hey, can I read about that before we get to that? So just a lot of curiosity. And I did get one piece of criticism, which I think is totally fair. And I'm going to even name it, because I think, so I had somebody say, hey, just so you know, I'm really loving the series, but it's not what I thought it was going to be. When you said heaven, hell, and everything in between, I don't feel like you've talked much about heaven and hell. You've talked about everything in between.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I guess that's true. But a series titled Everything in Between, doesn't really sound like a really interesting series. Or
it does need the 2 other pieces of the Venn diagram.
Yeah, what is everything in between what?
Yeah.
So
and I'm not sure a series just devoted to hell would be that much of an appeal. I don't know how we'd sell that one.
I don't know. You might be surprised on that. Maybe though. Maybe you're right. So anyway, I think there's been a lot of interest around that, which I love. And I love anytime we're kind of forcing people to dig a little deeper. And I think that that's going to continue in this series. So, I'm curious to see where this goes. Yeah. But I do think, I think this is very timely. I actually talked to a guy in Starbucks this morning who just listened to the first part. He hasn't listened to the second part of the series yet. He just listened to the first part because he missed it. And I think he did it over the weekend, because I talked with him last week, and he hadn't watched the service yet. And I don't know this guy all that well, so I don't know if he listens to our podcast or not. But a few months ago, he told me he's going to our church. But anyway, he said he listened to the first week, and he was interested in. He said, can you still send me that information about the governance war stuff? But anyway, we were talking, and he said, what he said to me was, this is really timely for me. And I said, oh, really? Why is that? And he said, I just have a lot of questions about why people are behaving the way they are, about why things seem so much more intense in the world related to political issues, social issues. He's like, I think this season's caught a lot of me and my friends. He's a young single guy. A lot of me and my friends off guard, in life. Mm-hmm. And he's clearly an introspective guy, because when I was in my 20s, I didn't think like that. He's a pretty sharp guy.
Right.
And so he was just like, I just find myself thinking about that a lot. I'm trying to make sense of what's happening in the world. And he's like, this is the first thing that feels like, instead of talking about the issues, let's talk about what's underneath all of that. And so I just thought, that's right. That's why I think this is a good time for this. And I don't know that we'll tie this all up in a perfect bow. There's part of me that's wants to do this series through the rest of the year. And there's part of me that wants to be done with it at the end of the month, so we'll see where that goes. But, I think that's why. I think it's striking a chord because, we're not talking about symptoms.
Yeah.
We're talking about root issues. We're talking about, if you take it in the medical world, we're not talking about like I have a headache or, I'm having stomach issues. Like we're talking about like, what's your baseline health? Like we're doing a whole diagnostic of what does baseline health look like, and we're building up from that. And so, yeah, I hope that's helpful for people,
I think it's good too. Like you're talking about the guy you ran into at Starbucks, and I was thinking about this the other day, that it's easy to, and this kind of plays into the worldview, because part of us forming our worldview is also time and space, where we are right now. And it's easy to look around. We just did this series about third party, and to kind of feel some of, we always make jokes about, gosh, 2020, it's it's just awful. There's a global pandemic. There's just like all things, the hits just keep on coming. And it's easy to look at that and feel, gosh, this is the most tumultuous year in a lot of our lifetimes.
For
and
sure.
then just to make the assumption that there's never been another thing like this before.
Yeah.
But, in reality, like every generation has gone through a period, especially every generation of Christians for the last couple thousand years has gone, and you see it in the New Testament in Paul's time, has gone through a period where they think, oh my gosh, like this is it, like these are the signs, like Jesus is coming back, or it's not going to get that much worse. And I think I think there's a little bit of a word of caution in doing that, in the sense that we still don't know, we don't know, and none of that stuff that's happening now necessarily points to that, but it is something to consider when we are talking about our worldview.
Sure.
Which, there was just so much like...
Well, and when you strip, so this is why week 4 is going to be super helpful. We're going to bring some of these things together, but when you start to, so when we talk about worldview and you strip your belief systems or your ideas down to the most basic structures. So like if you just take away all the, like everybody believes different things,
right?
Like there's 5 basic categories, and a lot of people think different things, there's, and this is what we're going to go through in week 4. So, there may be people that are going to email me, want more information on this. I'm just going to say, hey, wait till week 4. But, the 5 basics are knowledge, origins, conditions, solutions, and destinations. So knowledge, like, what's the ultimate true source? Like what should everything be measured by and interpreted through? Like where do we find knowledge, and what's the true source of knowledge? Origins, why is there something instead of nothing?
Right.
So like that's the second one. The third one is conditions. Not only why is there something instead of nothing, why are things the way they are in the world? Solutions, if there are problems in the world, which you may not think there are by your worldview, but if there are problems in the world, how do they get solved? What's the solutions to problems? And then destinations. Where is all this headed?
Right.
And so those are the 5 basic constructs. And so what we're trying to do is we're going to the most basic level. Like the week 1, we talked about, in some ways, why is there something instead of nothing? And we jump pretty quickly into, so that's about origins. And then we jump pretty quickly into conditions. Like, why are things the way they are?
Right.
Well, and we pointed back to this governance war, and this is what happened. This has influenced the world. God gave us free will. So this is what broke out. And, we continued this last week with some more about conditions. So, why are things in your life the way they are? This is all the bringing heaven down into our lives, or the values or the order of the kingdom of heaven down into our lives, or pulling the chaos of hell up into our lives, which is, again, been this battle, what you're talking about is this isn't new.
Right.
It's manifests itself in different ways with greater levels of intensity at different seasons throughout humanity. And so what I'm trying to do is get us back to a baseline of thinking about this that's based on a cohesive construct of ideas.
Right.
And the reason we're digging all of this up and pulling it apart is so that we can put it back together and go, hey, here's the cohesive construct through which you should look at the world. Now, it would have been easy if you said, I almost did this, and you know this from content. I was going to start week 1 with, hey, here's the construct through which you should look at the world. In the end, it wasn't the best way to start. It was better to pull all this apart, and then now we're going to go put it back together. So, I think that creates more questions than answers right now. But more specifically, this last weekend when we talked about why are things the way they are, one of the things we said was that And again, I actually got a question about this because I didn't have a lot of time to unpack this, but it is ironic that in the garden, a little bit of consciousness, like their eyes being open to the fact that that they were naked,
Right.
and the fact that they should be afraid because now they're sinful, and that little bit of consciousness, you can't put that you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube.
Right.
And so now, so that's the condition. That what's the solution to that? Like, how do you solve that? Like, how do you solve that? I know I'm not perfect. I know I'm not good. Like, that's a basic framework of like, okay, there's problems in my life and in the world. Where do I go to solutions for that? And again,
Right.
just a hint towards the last week, like, and how do I know that's true? Like, how do I know what's the knowledge source
Right.
for which I believe this is why things are the way they are, and these are the solutions to those things.
Yeah.
Like what? And that has to ultimately lead to where this all ends. So like, I think that's one of the things I find most disturbing is so many people have frameworks or worldviews that are incoherent because they actually don't all line up. And if you force somebody to sit down and go, well, here's how you know things are true, maybe it's through your experience.
Right.
Or every individual. This is postmodernism. Like, I know what's true for me, and you know what's true for you. That's postmodernism in a nutshell. It's oversimplification, but you get the idea. So, like, that's the knowledge, origins of the world. Well, whatever you think they are.
Right.
And whatever I think they are, or whatever our experience has proven to us, and the why things they are. So these things, they don't line up with each other,
Right.
and they aren't coherent. They don't fit together. And I think that's one of the unique things about the Christian worldview is when you break it down to its most basic essence, these things, at least it's consistent. You may not believe it's true,
Right.
but it's a coherent worldview,
Mm-hmm.
where many of the worldviews out there are not. It's not the only coherent worldview. I believe it's the only true worldview, but it's not the only coherent one. But most people don't have a coherent worldview. And so that's what I'm really trying to get at. And that's why the pulling it apart first is when people go, well, I don't know that I believe that's true. And I don't know that that's the case. Well, when we come to week 4, I'm going to go, let me show you why this is at least coherent. And if you believe one of these things, you got to believe all of these
Right.
things.
There's a whole enchilada. Well, that's what struck me from listening on this Sunday was that and I wasn't in content this week, or I would have brought this up. But this idea of the Christian worldview, there's a sense that it takes work for you to actually like adopt it and have it be yours. And what I mean by that is, and you even point to this that throughout your message, you're kind of there's a few scriptures that mention it, but you're kind of pointing to at the nugget of all of that, at like sort of the nucleus is the teachings of Jesus, and we always have this phrase, pointing people back to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a lot of times as Christians, we can sort of have this attitude as followers of Christ that I have an opinion and I'm a follower of Christ, therefore my opinion is Christ-like.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, end of discussion.
Yeah.
And
that's backwards.
What we've done by that is we've removed ourselves from any work, any responsibility for whatever that opinion or that thing is that we're arguing. Yeah. And this comes into play in politics and all kinds of different things. Yeah. Whereas if we can go, I'm a follower of Jesus, which means I'm going to study and research and invest time in and just wear the teachings of Jesus.
Yeah.
Then if we all are committed to doing that, then that coherent worldview just becomes something that we live out.
So that's a great example. So let's use what you just said a minute ago. In reality, what you did there was you described your view of the conditions of your life and the world. Yeah. So if I claim to be a follower of Jesus, your claim is that I no longer struggle with the sinful nature.
Right.
The problem is that's just not what this worldview claims.
Right.
That's incoherent with what this worldview, with the conditions of this worldview. So you think the solution is I just call myself a Christian, and now whatever my opinions are, my beliefs are, will become Christ-like.
Right.
But that's not the case, because the conditions of the world we live in is we still live in a world, even though you've stepped this, and this was to get more practical, what we talked about this last weekend, now that you are in the state of light. So the Apostle Paul said, you are now light. You're not darkness anymore. You are in the state of being in the light. You're not in the darkness. So because of that, you should live in that. Well, if you automatically did because of your faith in Christ, he wouldn't tell you that.
Right.
He wouldn't say, because it's what we said week 1,
Right.
Galatians 5. These two natures, the sinful nature and the spirit, they're forces, and they're warring against each other.
Right.
That is the actual conditions of the world.
Right.
And the solution is not just claim to be a Christ follower.
Right.
The solution is make choices to trust and show your faith and show your belief and live out your belief in Jesus.
Right.
Okay, you've claimed he's Savior and Lord. That secures your eternal destiny. But for you to experience the goodness of the kingdom of heaven now, the solution in the scripture is not just to believe, but it's to walk out your belief,
Right.
to live in that belief,
Yeah.
to live in that light. And that's how we bring the goodness, and that's part of the solutions to not just eternity, but to the present.
Right. Which is why, in Colossians, Paul talks about the Christian, like we're a new creation.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not we are, we're the same person, but we're just wearing a different outfit.
Yeah.
We're actually this,
Yep.
we're this new creation, this word picture. Back when I was in high school, my dad was my youth pastor, and I remember him using this word picture, and I'm sure he got it from somewhere else. Good old Brad.
Good old Brad.
Shout out to my dad. But
Brad's, I know Brad's listening.
I'm sure he is. I don't know where he got this from, or maybe it's his own.
I hope he's listening.
But he talked about, when talking about the new creation, this idea of the caterpillar who, goes about his life being a caterpillar,
Yep.
and then one day climbs up on a branch, forms a cocoon, and comes out a butterfly.
Yep.
It's a new creation.
That's right.
And you don't ever see a butterfly hanging out with caterpillars,
That's
doing
right.
caterpillar things.
That's right.
It's this new creation that's flying around.
Yep.
And I think that's a really great word picture to talk about. To talk about this idea of a new creation.
Credit to Brad Asolis.
It's Brad. I'll drop his email in the comments if you have any questions for.
So here's the thing, and I love that metaphor, Brad, by the way. But the thing about that is, and again, it assumes a lot. But the thing about that's related to what we're talking about is, it wasn't that that the caterpillar just needed to be made better or fixed up, or you need to put wings on it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it literally had to be completely transformed,
Right.
and its whole essence had to become something new.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference. It's like, it's not, hey, I needed a little help, and so I sprinkled a little Jesus onto my life, and
Voila. Yeah.
everything's better.
Right.
Like, it's like, no. Like, you were hopelessly in darkness,
Yeah.
and you needed to be brought into a new state of light and completely transformed. Now, the thing about that is, in the world we live in, like, you come into the light, but we still live in a world where darkness exists.
Mm-hmm.
And we still live influenced. So that's the other thing is when it comes to conditions of the world, like, we're in this time. So it's not just the conditions of the world and what happened. It's like where we are in history.
Right.
So the conditions were different before Christ came.
Right.
Now that Christ came, there was the conditions changed, and then when the Holy Spirit was sent into the world, the conditions changed in the world, and then in the end times, when Christ returns, the conditions will change again. So it's that understanding too, like, where are we in history, and what are the conditions? And the conditions in the world now are that no longer is sin dominant in the world, and that's the language of the New Testament, where Christ came and it was actually John the Baptist first that said, hey, repent and believe. And actually in the Greek, it's be repenting. It's progressive. Be repenting and be believing, because there's a new order. Right. There's a new kingdom at hand, is what he says. And then Jesus announced the new kingdom. And when he defeated death, sin and death through the cross and resurrection, he went and sat where? The right hand of the Father. That was claiming an authority over the earth. Now, it's not the final judgment. It's not a final reign.
Mm-hmm.
That's coming. He promised to return, and that the kingdom would be brought into its fullness.
Right.
but he still reigns. And so the truth is, as believers, we can have victory over sin
Right.
in our lives. We can have victory over the flesh, but it will still influence us
Yeah.
in this period. And one day that'll end.
Well, yeah, and bringing it full circle, regardless of which of those conditions that have changed, our call has always been just like we've been talking about in this series, is to pull heaven to earth.
Yeah.
And it's not this passive, just standing by waiting for that final day of judgment when we get swooped out of here, and until then, I'm just going to kind of make it through.
Yeah.
It is actually, in a sense, actively helping Jesus in that final thing.
Yeah.
And so our role is pulling heaven to earth.
Because what we're told is, and this goes back to the butterfly, like this, God's going to take this world and he's going to restore it. He's going to build the kingdom of heaven here. Like, and if you weren't a part of our heaven series a couple of years ago, go back and I build out the whole theology of that from the Bible and where does that come from. But it's not like we're going to be exported to some other place somewhere else.
Right.
We're going to be lifted out of the earth. God's going to transform the earth. New heavens, new earth here. We return. And so he's not going to, it's like the butterfly. He's not going to just wipe the slate clean and I don't need the caterpillar anymore. He's going to take the caterpillar and he's going to transform it into something new.
Yeah.
And just like he does our lives. And so we need to participate with that.
Right.
Like that's part of aligning our life with God's ultimate redemptive plan for the world.
Mm-hmm.
Not just for our lives, but for the world. And so when we do that with the world, we do that, I would say, redemptively.
Yeah. So
participate in it.
This last Sunday, you spent a lot of time talking about shining a light on, exposing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I guess we like to, as part of this podcast through this series, is to go deeper on this series. But today we want to talk a lot about the how, like the practical. All of this stuff is great, like to learn, to head knowledge, to understand, gives us context, perspective. But like, what are some practical ways for the people listening out there can actually go, all right, how do I do this? How do I shine a light on? How do I expose the darkness? What does that look like? Is there a framework that you can give me to work with? So,
and in fairness, you weren't at content this week, but to give people some insight, that's what I got beat up on in content. Like
you left that off.
I walked away from the sermon on Sunday feeling really good about it. And it was a little long, but I felt really good about it and got a lot of great feedback. And then I get to the content meeting, people are like, "Man, it was really, really great." And here's what we thought: like you told people what to do, like, "Hey, you need to bring this in light, exposing light," but like. We didn't talk about how to do that. Like, and I'm like, you guys, I already didn't have enough time to unpack everything I'm doing. Like, did you want to use maybe the whole hour should be the sermon instead of anyway.
No music.
Nobody wants that.
That's not a real threat.
Nobody wants that. But there's some people that want that. There's some few people that don't love the music.
Shout out to the Bible nerds.
But we talked this week about. And I want to go back to what we were talking about a second ago in the garden, like the solution for the chaos that was brought into our lives through that little bit of consciousness in the rebellion of man that was driven by the temptation of Satan. The answer is not what they did, covering up and hiding. That's what we talked about this weekend. In fact, very clearly the New Testament says that's not hiding that or closing your eyes to truth is not the antidote. It's not denial. That's denial. That's unconsciousness. It's greater. It's way more consciousness. It's like, okay, we have to open our eyes to everything that's happening and understand the truth about everything to understand what's actually going on. And so, we made this claim that like, living in the light, bringing things into the light is how we bring the goodness of heaven down into our lives. That even though it's painful sometimes, as a matter of fact, this was some content that was cut from the weekend, but I want to get the quote right. Carl Jung, you're familiar, philosopher. He said, "That which we need most will be found where we least want to look." And if you think about that, it's like most people go, like you tell them that and they're like, yeah, that's true. That's true. Like the things I don't want to talk about, the things that I don't want to be challenged on are probably the things I need to talk about or be challenged on if I'm actually going to grow. Like what I actually need most. Yeah. So I'll give you another.
It's very Yoda-esque.
It is. It's a very Yoda statement, which I mean, he's the great philosopher of the Star Wars
That's right.
of the Star Wars series. But I'll give you another example. Somebody close to me was telling me a story about some work they're doing for a company, and somebody sent an email about somebody in the company that did a video, and it was a video that was, this person doesn't do videos all the time, speaking and whatever, and the criticism by this person was like scathing, but like I watched the video and I went, I mean, they're right. Like it was terrible. It was so mean spirited.
Yeah.
And so like the thought was, this person was telling me like, but who would write that? Who would be so mean? And I'm like, I mean, I don't think they did it right, but somebody who wanted to be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Like I look at it and go like, I hope people tell me that if when I do things like that, or if I, and that's the purpose of the content meeting.
Right.
It's like, hey, shine a light, tell me, expose the truth. And then, so all of this works together. Like this is exactly what we're talking about. It's like, they wanted to close their eyes. They wanted to make this person out to be a villain. And I'm like, you don't even know that person. You don't even care. And it's like, the reality is because you don't know them, and because they didn't do it in a loving way, and because they weren't, they didn't give it a compliment sandwich like we all like to digest negative feedback.
I hope this email finds you well.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And at the end, blessings, I hope the best for you, and then it's all terrible in between. But it didn't make it not true.
Right.
And it, sadly, it was true. And my guess is they're going to discard the valuable information that was offered to them there because somebody didn't do it right. So now that's what I want to talk about, because that was valid criticism of me this week, was that we told people what to do, but we didn't tell them how to do it, because the how is important.
Right.
If we're going to be careful to make sure that what's brought into the light isn't either disregarded or misinterpreted or just done poorly. Mm-hmm. And so it gets discarded. Like, how do we do that? And so I want to break this in, and you feel free to jump in, but I want to break this into two categories, because I think there's two different things we were talking about this weekend. One is I've done something or acted in a way or have a secret, or I have something that I need to bring into the light. That's something that I've either done that's hurting me and or hurting others around me. Which usually when you're doing things that are hurtful to yourself, they end up hurting other people around you as well. So there's that one side. So we can talk about that for a few minutes. And then the other thing is I need to bring something into the light that somebody else did that either hurt me or is hurting them or is hurting other people around them. So these are sort of two different things, and I think they involve different approaches and different how strategies. So let's start with the one about something I need to bring in the light. I had somebody after Sunday's sermon, since Sunday's sermon, that has come to me and said they told me about something that they need to bring in the light, and they were sort of thanking me and going, "Hey, I just need to go tell this person." And I was like, "Oh wait, hold on a second. Like, I don't think that's something you can just go spring on that person.
Right?
Like you need to think about it, like, because I do think they need to bring it into the light." And so I wasn't telling them not to do that. There are just certain timing for how you should do that. Like, so I'll give you another example. When my wife and I, several years ago, we were going through the darkest time in our marriage. I was talking to my counselor, and I said, there's this thing I've never told my wife that it bothers me. It hurts me. And I told her what it was, and she's like, she's not ready to receive that. You can't tell her that right now. Like, the circumstances of your relationship, that is true, and you do need to tell her that at some point.
Right.
But you can't tell her that right now.
Now's not the time.
Now's not the time. So I do think there is a timing sense in that. So I'll just tell you, here's what I think. And some of this is off the cuff. Some of this is just years and thousands of hours of conversations with people of what causes things to go well when it's something you've done that's either hurt somebody else or and again, I sort of jumped into what somebody else has done that's hurting you, but I was using that as an example to say, hey, just throwing it into the light doesn't always work well. I think if there's something you've done that's had an effect on somebody else or is going to affect somebody else when they hear about it, I would not start with that person. This person that came to me this week that said, "Hey, I think I need to be forward about this." The first question I said was, "Hey, do you have anybody else in your life that you could process this with out loud?" Because what this person needed to do is needed to sit down with a trusted group of friends, share it with them first, and say, "Hey, I need you to pray for me. I need some advice on how I should approach this situation, how I should approach and talk about what I've done, this secret that's there, how to expose it in a way that we can find a healthy path forward without dropping a bomb on somebody." Because that's another thing. You don't want to just blindside somebody with with that information. Like, that's a second wrong. Okay, you've already done wrong. You've done something that has affected them and they don't know about it, or it is affecting them and they don't understand what's going on. And when you bring this to light, they're going to be like, "Oh, of course, now I understand." But if you blindside them with that, it'll just feel like that's like, two wrongs don't make a right. We've all heard that, but like that's like a second, third, and fourth wrong. Like, and so, processing with a group of people that can give you some advice and some strategies for how to do that. And then I would say, so starting with that and getting some good advice as to how to approach that, because when you're bringing that into the light, there may be several other steps before that. There may be other conversations you need to have before that about other things that have been challenges, or other things that have happened into your life that would ultimately give the context for why you haven't been truthful, or why you betrayed them and they don't know about it, or why you behaved in the way you did, not as an excuse, but to give some greater context for the position you've been living from. And, you explaining, "Hey, I'm trying to grow and these are some things that have happened and this is the context for my life." Like, there may be some of those other conversations that need to happen, which was the case for me and Jen, by the way. Like, she needed to explore some things, and so did I, that were other issues that were more primary and more basic and foundational in our lives, and grow a little bit so that we could have this mature conversation. And when we did, it ultimately went really well. And it was actually a building block for our relationship. So, I think having a trusted group of friends first, and then once you have a strategy for what you're going to communicate and how you're going to communicate it, I think when and where. So you have to have this first conversation about what and how. And I will say sometimes there are some things that, when you talk about exposing or bringing the truth into the light, there are some things that aren't helpful.
Right.
Like, you have to gain wisdom and discernment through friends, through your faith, through praying, through your conscience from the Holy Spirit, to determine how many details. I'll give an example. Like, not long ago, I was having a conversation with somebody who was unfaithful. And like, they were wrestling with how much detail to share. And I was like, I think you have to leave that up to the other person. I think you should give them, you should own it. You should explain what you did, what happened, without the details that they may not want to know.
Right.
Because, and if they want to know them, then you should share them because they're entitled to it. But if they don't want to know the details, you shouldn't force those details on them. Because that may make it, it's not that they aren't true.
Right.
It just, they're not helpful and they may not be needed, and they could make moving forward more complicated. That person, you have to then trust the Holy Spirit and that person that goes and be open to if they want more detail. Like, and so I was having this conversation with this person about, being unfaithful. And I just said, he didn't have a trusted group of friends so I was sort of processing. So we were talking about what you should share and how you should share it. Like, how do you explain that information? You shouldn't just sit down and say, "Hey, I just want you to know I had an affair." Like, it's like you can't do it that way.
Yeah.
Like, You have to use tact. You have
Right.
to have some tact and like walk into, like, give them some anticipation into this conversation.
Yeah. It's
Or
funny you say tact because I had somebody um, early in my 20s, early in my career, who coached me about, dude, you need to learn tact. And he's like, the best way I can explain tact to you is it's making a point without making an enemy. So if you can figure out how to just like what am I trying to communicate?
That's pretty
How,
good.
without blindsiding somebody, it's making a point without making an enemy. So the whole time you were telling this, I was like, this is tact.
You know, it's funny.
This is what
You
we're talking
mentioned
about.
your wisdom from dads. You mentioned your dad.
Yeah.
So I remember this story my dad told. My dad used to tell a lot of stories to us. We were sitting at breakfast doing our morning devotional one morning, and my dad was talking about tact and like how that's important to tell the truth, but to be careful about how you tell the truth. And he said, here's the best way I can illustrate it is and he made these names up, but I think the names were Susie and Bobby. And so, Susie came home from the grocery store and Bobby said to Susie, "Hey, your mom's dead." And of course she freaks out and like whatever. And it's like, how my mom wasn't even sick. How is she dead?
Yeah.
Like detail left out is that the mom was his mother-in-law was living with them. So like, did you kill her?
Yeah.
Did you like, what happened?
Yeah.
And I remember my dad saying, well, he said it would have been better because here's what happened. It would have been better to say, hey, your mom was trying to help us out and she was doing some cleaning and she went upstairs and she was doing some cleaning. She realized there was a bunch of stuff out on the balcony and she went out on the balcony and she began cleaning off the balcony and she realized that over the edge of the balcony there was something that needed to be cleaned out. It was a real eyesore from the front. Remember that thing that's always been out there and whatever? So she tried to reach over and get that thing and remove it. And she fell off the balcony and she died. So when you got home and you saw the fire department, everybody, like, so along the way, as you're telling the story, she begins to realize,
Right.
like, oh, my mom is involved in this, and oh, the ambulance is here from her, and so then it's like, and
She kind of
then
sees
she
the
fell,
point before you
and we
have to
called
say it.
911, and they came, and they're treating her, and she didn't make it, and so. Like, that's way different than your mom died.
Right.
That's why the ambulance is here, like, and so I know that's a silly example, but I'll never forget that because it's like, hey, there's important information that leads to this that actually could help somebody process as they're receiving this information. And, I think when you're bringing the truth to people, I years ago, I did a message called The Gift, and truth is a gift. Even hard truth is a gift. People don't always give gifts in healthy ways, though. And you can receive things that don't feel like a gift,
Right.
even though they actually are. Like, I'll give one example is discipline. It was a gift that I received discipline from my parents growing up. It didn't feel like it at the time, but like the way in which some kids receive discipline definitely doesn't feel like a gift. Looking back in my life, realizing that every time I received the gift of discipline, my parents sat down and talked to me about what I did and why it violated our family's rules or values or covenants and why I needed discipline, because discipline helps us learn. It helps us remember. Like it's like, if fire doesn't burn, you never learn. Like, but when you stick your hand in a fire and you get burned, you realize, like, I'm not sticking my hand in the fire
Doing
anymore.
that again, yeah.
Because there's natural consequences. Well, there's certain things in life where there's not natural consequences. And so discipline by my parents, while not easy, it was a gift. And the way in which they delivered that gift never made me question whether my parents loved me or not, or wanted the best for me or not. It didn't feel like a gift at the time, but looking back, I go, I always knew they wanted the best for me because the way in which they did this.
Right.
And so that discipline didn't scar me like I know many people it has. In fact, in counseling appointments, I've had many conversations with people who I think their parents' intention was to give them discipline, corrective discipline as a gift, but they didn't deliver it well.
Right.
And, that's a tension for all of us in parenting. But, so how you deliver that. So what and how is the first step, and gaining wisdom from other people, what and how. So that's the first step. And then I think the second step is where and when. So what and how now, where is the best environment for this? And where in the day, knowing, are they a morning person, an evening person? Where in the course of a season of life, is this a tough season or the right season or the wrong season? And when, so that I bled into when a little bit. And when, like, when's the right timing for this? And where's a place they'll feel safe? And when is a time that they'll be able to receive this? Probably, like for my wife, it's not late at night.
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't have conversations. We don't have important conversations or difficult conversations after 9 o'clock ever. We just don't, because it won't go well.
Mm-hmm.
And so knowing where and when this information will be best received from somebody is really important. So
That's good.
just talk with somebody else about what and how, formulate a plan, and then figure out where and when is the best time to deliver that information, and then and be diligent. This is going to take work. I mean, there's all sorts of people who don't put in the work to bring things into the light in the right way, and it is like you're saying, it's ripping off the Band-Aid, which that's one approach.
Yeah.
It's just not often the healthiest approach,
right.
to healing,
mm-hmm.
is ripping off the Band-Aid. So,
and to pulling heaven to earth for that.
That's
person.
right. That's right. Yeah. And you got to remember that you're not just pulling, and that can be selfish. It's like, oh God, I just got to get this truth out there.
Right.
Well, that's all about you.
Yeah.
And that's what my counselor told me. I was like, well, I just feel like I need to say this. And she's like, but that's about you.
It's the easy way.
Like, you want to bring goodness down, not just into your life, but into their life. And like, so you have to do that carefully. So that's when I have something I need to bring in the light that I've done, or the way in which I've acted, or my secret. And that, you have to be careful. That takes courage, and you need other people to not only share that with and get strategies around, but to hold you accountable.
Yeah.
For actually doing it and walking with you as you deal with the fallout, whatever that might be from that choice.
Yeah.
So then the other side is the what about when it was something that was either done to you,
mm-hmm.
or something that somebody else has done that needs to be brought in the light? I think the first step is still the same. Like, to me, it's you need to first talk to a group of people around you about this information and what's happening, and you need to talk about how you should approach this person. But the good news about this is you actually have some prescription related to this in the scriptures. Mm-hmm. So if somebody sinned against you or is sinning against somebody else, and I'll just say this, by the way, if somebody's like gravely in danger, like that's not you don't need biblical grounds for being a whistleblower. You should just call the police. That's like a legal issue. And so like if
it's an emergency.
Yeah, right. If there's emergency, if they're like I hear this all the time from people who are like, hey, so and so, they're, in fact, just 2 weeks ago, this is terrible, but this is a very relevant situation. Like, there was somebody who was being abusive to their spouse and then left them and took off with a child. And I'm going, did you call the police? Like, they called me.
Yeah.
And I'm going, no, don't call me. I'll help you on the back end. You should call the police.
Right.
Like, that's called kidnapping.
Right.
Like, that's so there's two big infractions there, legal infractions. There's domestic violence and there's kidnapping. Like, that's, you need to deal with we need to make sure these people are safe first.
Right.
So that's probably to the extreme, but when it comes to biblical ways of handling these things, there is Matthew 18 gives us a model. Like, you're supposed to go to that person first. So like, I've been involved with these situations as well. Let's say the issue that needs to be exposed is somebody has a drinking problem or prescription drug. They're abusing prescription drugs. So do you tell their spouse first? Do you tell their employer? And I'll just tell you, for me, like, there was a situation where the wife of a guy in our small group came to me and she said, hey, here's what's going on. And, I need your help. And so I said, well, have you talked to him about this? And, he had problems in the past, but he was dealing with a prescription drug issue. And, this is years ago. And she had. she had confronted him about it and said, "Hey, I know something's going on. I know you're hiding this from me, and it's got to stop." And then she continued to tell the symptoms, and they were getting worse. And so then she came to me and said, "Hey, I need your help. Can you help me confront him about this?" So then I did, and he still denied it, and the symptoms were still there, and they got worse. And then eventually, a group of us from the church, not like we didn't call the elders, like sometimes that's needed, but like a group of us from the church, representing the church, like the body of Christ, we came all together and came around and confronted this guy, and he still refused. And so we basically had to tell him, like, "Hey, he refused to see it." And because of that, at that point, so this is the most extreme example, like we had to tell him, "Hey, look, you're out of this circle right now by your own choice. Like, we need to protect her and your kids. And so you can't live here. You can't come home to this house, and you can't be in our circle anymore." I mean, that's what the New Testament actually teaches people to do, which sounds heartless, but it's exactly what he needed. And, eventually he was dealing with all the consequences of his own decisions. Like all of this, we had to bring in light that, like, hey, this is all a result of your choices. We're all trying to help you. And eventually he, because of the consequences of his choices, he wanted to face it and confront it for himself and begin to live in truth,
right?
And to be honest about what was going on. And even still, at first, he wasn't. I remember taking him to rehab and them calling me the next morning early, and I didn't know this, but he was in such difficult shape, and he would be fine with me sharing all this, but he was in such difficult condition that he had downed a bunch of pills right before I dropped him off at rehab, and he had this massive reaction overnight, and they had to take him to the emergency room at the hospital. They don't do detox. This place didn't do medical detox. And so I literally had to go to the hospital, and we ended up spending the entire day with him in the hospital, and we get the toxology report, and we find out all the stuff that's in his system. And he had, in the intake, when he was telling them when he last used, it was like a couple of days ago. Yeah. And so he wasn't even being honest. And so there's even different levels of dealing with the truth. But the point in that being, when we followed this process where, she confronted him about this after, talking with her friends about it, after talking with me about it, she confronted him, and then we confronted him, and then a group of us came and we're trying to bring this light in front of him. And there's a very biblical idea there, and a biblical model there that helps us to know practically how to make those things go well. The thing I get concerned about is, I think there's even one step. So in that situation, it was absolutely her right to bring that in the light. I think there's sometimes that people want to be a whistleblower on somebody, and it's not your job. It's not your information. Like when somebody says, "Hey, this is what's going on," and I think this person needs to be held accountable.
That's why it's important to have that first step of those people that you're bouncing stuff off of.
That's right.
Yeah. That's great.
And I don't know about you, but I've confronted with people. I've had people come to me all the time and go, "Hey, I know this is going on with somebody," and I'm like, "That's none of your business."
Yeah. Stay out of that.
Like that. It's mandate? You don't have a right to you're not the judge,
right?
Like, and if it's not affecting you personally, if you haven't been invited by somebody else into that conversation, you don't have the relationship to confront that person.
Right.
Like this is. This through gossip, and you should wonder, what is it about your own sin that wants to expose this person to make them look bad? Like, what is it in you? Like, I don't know that you have this person's best interest at heart, which is different. When I love somebody, I care about them, I'm not sure how to bring this in the light. That's very different, as opposed to, I heard this is going on with somebody, and I think they need to be held accountable. And it's like, okay, well, that may be true, and there may be some circumstances in which somebody's in a leadership role, and this something does need to be brought in the light or need to be dealt with. But I think the big key, and I feel like this last weekend I felt short of this. It's like this is why the church is so important. Like, you gotta have a body of believers. You gotta have a group of people that are close enough that when something like this, either for somebody else needs to be brought in the light or you need to bring in the light, you need to have a safe group of people that you can process this with. Because usually for most of us, there's too much emotion involved.
Right.
And our emotions, more than anything else, they cloud our decision-making ability. And it doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you not smart. When our emotions are clouding our decision-making ability, we make bad decisions about how to expose things, about who to expose, when to expose things. And when you have a group of other people that are around you that aren't as subjectively, your feelings about the situation or your view of the situation isn't clouded by your subjective emotions, they bring objectivity. They bring, and you begin to tell about, hey, this is what I think I'm going to do, or this is what I think I need to do. What do you think? Oftentimes they go, I don't think I'd do that.
So just tying it all together, putting a big bow on it. That's kind of the common thread is having that group of people that you can bounce things off of. I think that's a lot. I think that's a lot for the listeners to unpack. I think it maybe even something to pick up on next week.
Yeah.
Adding.
Well,
to
and this weekend we're going to continue that.
Yeah.
Like some of that conversation. Steve Carter's continue our series this weekend, and we're going to build upon that. So that's a good place for us to stop.
Well, hey, thanks for sharing all that. It's like sermon 2.0 in the middle of the week, and thank you for tuning in. Again, Joel's email, if you have any more questions about this stuff, is joelt@missionaz.org. And don't forget to subscribe, share the podcast, comment below. We love hearing from you. So thanks again.